It's a great day to be a TV historian. Welcome to Advanced TV Herstory, where we connect the dots of TV and feminism to American culture and politics. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams. This is part 2 of a very fun, fast-paced chat I had with author Lee Gambin. Lee helps connect the dots via the very special episode found in sitcoms mostly from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. In part 1, we talked about TV in Australia and how it creates loyal audiences that Americans didn't even necessarily know existed because we don't think necessarily beyond our continent. Also, we talked about the scope of his 2-volume book entitled Tonight on a Very Special Episode, When TV Sitcoms Got Serious. Join us in welcoming Lee Gambin because you know what? TV did get serious. I am reflecting on designing women taking on, important social issues. They did fat shaming, and they did the one that I know you guys put into the your contributors put into the book was the one where Mary Jo finds out that a favorite teacher at the school that her kids attend, I believe, is that how this goes? That he's gay and he is HIV positive. Do you remember?
Yes.
And as usual in a Designing Women episode, there is a 2.5 minute long one breath speech by either Annie Potts or Dixie Carter, and you expect that. That's a woman finding her voice as opposed to a lecture, but it is sort of a lecture.
But it's so wonderful. I love that you mentioned that because Dixie Carter does those wonderful speeches and they're beautifully written, penned by people like, the show's creator, like Linda Bloodworth-Thomason, etc., and her amazing writing team. But they're like war cries. They're angry war cries from this incredible woman. And they're feminist by their very nature. They're also tackling social issues. They're angry. They're, really well informed. And also, yes, Annie Potts in that episode in particular does a speech about the crisis that was AIDS. But that episode's legacy and where it comes from is divine. And I'll share the story. So Linda Bloodworth-Thomason, who created Designing Women, her mother contracted AIDS from a blood transfusion. And, obviously very devastating news to hear, but the way she was treated was even worse than the illness itself. So she was put into a ward. The other 12 people in the ward were gay men dying of AIDS. And she was given her medicine in a bucket and thrown inside the room. She was mistreated and basically just, neglected by the staff at this hospital. And Linda Bloodworth-Thomason was devastated. And the young men that were in the ward with her were even treated worse. So she one day was waiting to hear some more results or tests were happening with her mother. And she overheard 2 orderlies talking about the disease, this dreadful plague, this Holocaust that wiped, not just one generation, but multiple. And one of the orderlies said to the other one, well, one thing that's this disease, AIDS, has got going for it, it's killing all the right people. And that really stuck with Linda. That really resonated with her, and it made her angry, and also really impassioned to do something for this disease and give it a voice and give it some sort of prime time viewing, right? And AIDS had been covered in a lot of things, such as An Early Frost, the TV movie, and there was a few things here and there, but no one was talking about it, obviously, and the president himself wasn't. She decided for her mother and for these 12 young men in this ward to write an episode called Killing All the Right People, where a young man played by Tony Goldwyn, who is actually the grandson of Goldwyn, as in MGM, right? So, this incredible lineage there in itself. He plays a young gay man who's dying of AIDS who wants the women to design his funeral, and it rattles them. They're like, you're young, like you look so healthy. What the hell? That rattles them, brings AIDS into their world. And at the same time, this is the genius of the writing, there's a character, a client, who's incredibly homophobic and completely AIDS phobic. And she has this rant about, it's killing all the right people because it's killing off, primarily gay and bisexual men. And then all the other sort of splintered off groups that are copying this disease primarily, such as, intravenous drug users and sex workers, etc. And Dixie Carter then gives this incredible impassioned speech.
Well, I just heard the rumors, but I didn't actually believe it was true. Now, I don't like to hurt anyone's feelings, but if these boys hadn't been doing what they do, they wouldn't be getting what's coming to them now.
Imogen, gays aren't the only ones getting it.
No, but they're the ones who started it.
Actually, nobody knows how it got started. Gays are just one of the first groups that showed up in.
Yes, and for a good reason. You reap what you sow, and you boys brought this on yourselves. As far as I'm concerned, this disease has one thing going for it. It's killing all the right people.
Imogen, I'm terribly sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to move your car.
Why?
Because you're leaving.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about the only thing worse than all these people who've never had any morals before AIDS are all you holier-than-thou types who think you're exempt from getting it.
Well, for your information, I am exempt. I hadn't lived like these people, and I don't care what you say, Julia Sugarbaker. I believe this is God's punishment for what they've done.
Oh, yeah? Then how come lesbians get it less?
That is not for me to say. I just know that these people are getting what they deserve.
Imogen, get serious. Who do you think you're talking to? I've known you for 27 years, and all I can say is, if God was giving out sexually transmitted diseases to people as a punishment for sinning, then you would be at the free clinic all the time. And so would the rest of us.
That was all spearheaded because of Linda Bloodworth-Thomason's mother.
I'm going to follow up. So I had sent you a list of questions, and I was hoping we were going to get into the risk, the kind of risk that a showrunner such as Linda or Norman Lear was running when they decided that we're gonna have Maude have an abortion, or we're gonna have Edith attacked, or we're gonna do this HIV episode. And, when I think now about Les Moonves basically riding Linda Bloodworth-Thomason out of Hollywood, on a rail car, is it because she punched so many buttons? She wanted to push the envelope of the value of TV and to bring these lessons and this awareness and yes, opinions. But, you just take Designing Women and all of the issues that they took on. That was not something that at that point CBS really wanted. They don't want to have their switchboard light up the next morning. And the affiliates didn't want to field all of that fan mail, let alone that was before social media and emails.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, in your research and the research that your group encountered, and included in many of these chapters about these episodes, what other experiences did any of these shows have that caused perhaps them to just really have to fight for what they wanted to put on the air?
Well, in the case of Linda, I feel a lot of it's because she was a woman. People running her out of town. It's people don't want to have angry women, speaking via these amazing characters they've created on television. And she dealt with the Anita Hill trial. That's an episode of Designing Women. Like, this is incredible stuff, really important, vital stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these networks got scared of that. AIDS scared networks. When an early Frost, the TV movie, aired, there were no sponsors. All the sponsors pulled. There was only one ad, and it was for the Bible, right? So it was like an ad that, a Christian coalition peddled. But when you get to the sitcom stuff, definitely, people like Linda Bloodworth-Thomason, Susan Harris, she cut her teeth writing for Norman Lear. She was a single mum, struggling single mum, and she asked him for a job. And I think his response was kind of playing off her and going, I don't think you can, just to push her button. And she's like, oh, I can. And then she, in her 20s, writes this fantastic Maud's Dilemma double episode about abortion, which changed perspectives and actually changed helped change legislation. I mean, for B. Arthur to do that episode was a big deal. She got lots of mail, right? And the show got a lot of mail for that. So there were definitely risk factors, not only for creatives like Norman Lear and showrunners like Norman Lear and writers and future showrunners like Susan Harris, but for actors, for people like B. Arthur, that copped it, and on the flip side, you had Mary Tyler Moore copping it, about not being feminist enough, whatever that means, right? So all this kind of stuff was, because you're on display and you're on television and you're voicing something and you are a representative of something, you're going to cop criticism from varied perspectives.
The world was changing so fast that you went from, Mary Tyler Moore being the coolest thing on TV because she was hipper than that girl, to the change of even the 6 or 7 years that Mary was on TV. She could not change fast enough because of how that character was originally initiated. So to be true to that character, it's a good thing then that they didn't try to make her into Moore, but rather they let the Norman Lears and the Susan Harrises sort of run with it with Soap and all of the Lear spinoffs. And speaking of a Norman Lear episode, they did their due diligence to ensure that what they were presenting, apart from, a PSA, was appropriate and accurate. And so I understand that they consulted experts when they did Edith's 50th birthday, which is the one where she comes very close to being either assaulted or killed in her home.
Hiya, my name is Detective Lambert. I'm with the police department. I'd like to ask you a couple questions if I could.
Oh, sure. Come on in. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude. But they say women gotta be very careful these days with the robbers and the burglars.
Oh, no, I can't be too cautious, Miss...
Oh, Mrs. Bunker. Edith Bunker.
Mrs. Bunker. No, you can't be too cautious, because you see, seems there's a man in your neighborhood who's been... Well, he's been molesting women.
Oh.
So I'd like to ask you and your husband a couple questions, if I could.
Oh, sure. But my husband ain't here.
Oh, that's a shame.
Nobody's here. Well, maybe you can meet him some other time. But you can ask me questions. Sit down. As long as it don't take too long, because I got to get ready for my surprise birthday. Oh, I ain't supposed to know it.
No, this won't take long. First, let me just describe him to you, in case you see him. He's a man about my height and build, wears a gray suit, dark hat, and a blue and gold striped tie.
Oh, just like the one you're wearing.
Yeah, just exactly like the one I'm wearing.
There's this bizarre concept that only now consultation happens. That's not true at all. It's happened since early days of cinema. So as a film historian, when you research a lot of classic cinema, there's a lot of consultation that goes unnoticed, which is really important to talk about because there were people on there, whether it was to do with race or whether it was to do with culture, that were there as consultants. When you get to the television stuff and you mentioned Edith's 50th, Norman Lear consulted with rape counselling services and sexual assault survivors services. And see, the thing is, that double episode is amazing. It's so harrowing and so incredibly performed and scary and really confrontational and amazing. And there's elements that make it so complicated that the assailant is not a typical, what someone would think a rapist looks like, right? So he's handsome, he's presented as handsome, etc. So that kind of threw audiences, but that's what the consultants kind of discussed with Norman. They were like, make the assailant seem, quote unquote, all American and appealing because predatory men are everywhere. The other thing was the second part of the episode is actually, to me, more full, like it's just so powerful, where Gloria insists her mother tells the police. And she has to rattle her mother to wake up out of this kind of stunned, catatonia that she's kind of in from this horrible event, which makes total sense for her to be in that state in order for her mother to act on something. So that's another thing where it's talking about women claiming space to discuss this with men being silenced, because there's a great shot where Gloria and Edith are talking and having a confrontation. And the men, Archie and Meathead, are just in the background silent. So there's a whole idea that the consult was like, let this space be about women talking about surviving and, being and from a survivor's perspective and what needs to happen as a next step, etc.
And they sort of used that character of Gloria sort of became the educator. She became sort of the official how this should work. It's a very powerful episode, listeners. I'm not sure if it's available on YouTube, but there are certainly All in the Family airs on at least a couple different streaming services almost all the time. There may even be a copy of the DVD at your library. It is, I believe, season 8. So fairly far along in the series. And Jean Stapleton was fortunately given all of her flowers for that performance.
Oh yeah.
But it changed what everybody expected.
Sally Struthers is just divine in it, you know.
Yeah. It could not have been written or performed any better. And it was done before a live studio audience. Why is it important for a book that brings all of these episodes together and both, synopsizes them as well as throws in a bunch of context? Why is that important for us to have in the world?
Because I feel like a lot of, and it goes back to what I was saying about, that encounter as a young teen from that guy going, oh, that's just fluff, or that's just crap American TV, where I can say to that person and to the people who think that way that these shows do a lot more than provide laughs. They're not just saccharine. I hate when people think of them as saccharine, or they're not just, people screaming, the whole Norman Lear training school of acting where everyone just yells everything. Good. like, I love that, I remember, you watch All the Family and Good Times and more, they're just yelling. And it's like, yes, I want that, because it's kind of like, we're not going to be silenced. We're poor people, we're black people, we're women, we're all these different people, all these different voices, and we're going to be loud. I think that's something that's really important, that TV can say something outside of what it's supposed to do. So sitcoms, by their very nature, are supposed to be light and funny and 25 minutes of light entertainment. But they can also talk about rape, and they can talk about AIDS, and they can talk about feminism, and they can talk about all these different things and make it kind of tangible and applicable for people's worlds. TV is also, used to be a shared experience. So, someone in one city be watching something and someone in a rural area be watching the same thing, and that link can bring them all together and have this spark, this conversation, this national conversation.
Let me move on that one thought, because it's something that I've repeated off and on through the years. And the world has become more polarized. Families have become polarized. Families don't necessarily even speak or get together the way they used to. And those that do sometimes encounter the fact that there are now some who believe and think in one way and some who believe and think the other. And they can barely respect the very people who they are related to in the room. And when I think about what it's going to take once something big and earth-shaking happens that sort of ends this polarity, that has people waking up saying, oh my God, I can't believe I was believing that. But they can't say that out loud. They're going to have to save face. And how do you bring people back into the circle of that shared experience? And I believe it is TV. It is the notion that, you know what, we went through HIV once before, and we welcomed the reality that people are different, and they are as different in Bewitched and Addams Family and the Munsters as they are with the Jeffersons living next door to the Bunkers.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to celebrate the fact that was in art. That was art that was brought into our living rooms. And for the most part, everybody really liked it. They liked it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And that has become part of the American story that you can't roll back.
Mm-hmm. It's like American content, but speaking to everyone, and it can speak to everyone. And I think you hit the nail on the head again with that. It's art. So it's not to be dismissed. It's actual legitimate art. And as much as it's, people sort of see it as just throwaway television, it really isn't. It's political. It's socially important. It brings people together. It causes conversation. It stirs conversation. It's also, yes, absolutely polarizing, and it brings those kind of belief systems to the fore of people when they're watching very special episodes or episodes that tackle certain things, so it's really fascinating to hear varied perspectives. It's really interesting to have that kind of conversation about artistic integrity and what the shows are trying to do, and the idea of varied voices. Or if, when you hear things like Richard Baxey, the producer, on the Golden Girls, talking about how the women of the Golden Girls really loved a lot of the young male writers on the team, that was like, wow, okay. And Richard Vaxey was like, I was not allowed to watch Maude, and then ended up working on the Golden Girls. But the Arthur and Rue and Betty and Estelle really, really championed these men, young men in their 20s, writing the Golden Girls. So that kind of thing about this transcendence of art, that, head writers can not have to be the characters that they're portraying or reflected of that, but have that empathy. So it allows for empathy.
That reference you were making to the Golden Girls writer and Adrienne Barbeau, you were able to interview a handful, and for the most part, it's these little sort of cutouts of chapters are almost verbatim, just a stream of consciousness of memory and experience and reflection from some of these people. Who else did you interview and then were able to include in the books?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned Adrienne. So she's a legend. I love her, grew up loving her. And she gave an incredible interview where basically Maude inspired her to become an activist, basically become this feminist activist. She opened up her own women's health clinic, right, from the money she made from Maude, because she wanted to help women. So she had, free access to abortions, etc., and all this sort of stuff, which is just incredible. That's the power of art, right, that it can come in and turn you into an activist, or really kind of help embrace the activist in you, which is really cool. So she was a great interviewee, just amazing. And she talked about, the death threats that they got and, all that sort of stuff, which is terrifying, when you're just basically spreading a message of goodness and something that empowers women. The other interviewees it was really hard. I'll tell you, this is quite interesting. So I've done this job for a long time as far as critical writing as well as journalistic sort of writing and getting interviews with stars and, actors and actresses and filmmakers, blah, blah, blah. And in film, the realm of film, it's quite easy to get people. Like, it seems a lot easier. TV, it was just like, what the? It was just so hard to get people to commit to it or get them to talk or just basically get in touch with them. So as far as other interviewees, I mentioned Richard Vaxey. He was amazing, a wealth of knowledge. And he kind of, he's like this incredible wealth of knowledge where he's a big proponent of writers having to have empathy. He was talking a lot about that, which I found really fascinating, basically saying just because someone is an Asian American should not mean they shouldn't write a Jewish TV show. Of course they should. It's just, it's about embracing everything and being respectful and, and creating complicated works that aren't just so, black and white and carbon copy of other things that's been previously done.
And that the diversity does not have to become part of the story.
That's exactly right. That people are people, yeah. But then also sexuality and gender and race are absolutely important as well. So it's really interesting to sort of marry that. The other interviewees was Sherry Johnson from Punky Brewster. She was incredible. She was heaps of fun, and she had really interesting stories about the industry as a young woman sort of growing up in the industry, because she was a kid in Punky Brewster. And then, when she got to Family Matters, it was a very different world. And, yeah, she was cool to interview. Eileen Graff, who's just divine. I love her. She was Marsha in Mr. Belvedere. She talked a lot about the very special episodes and how they had a lot of consultation on that show. So, for instance, the AIDS episode with the young boy, that was heavily consulted. It was actually based on a producer's own children having AIDS. And then there was the molestation episode, which I actually find more harrowing than the Different Strokes one. That's creepy, but it's kind of comical in a way because of Gordon Jump, because he's so obviously a pedophile in the kind of ideas of what people have as sexual predators on children, that kind of, older guy and, just grotesque. Whereas Mr. Belvedere, and Eileen Graff talks about this, the predator, the pedophile, is handsome, athletic, he looks like he's got it together, quote unquote, so he becomes his friend, and that's even more, that's just vile. So it's really unsettling, that episode. And Eileen talked about that and talked about how the consultation was all about that, playing off the idea that it's not the Gordon Jump sort of type. Sorry, poor old Gordon Jump.
It's the tennis coach. It's the gymnastics coach. It's, for boys or girls. Listeners, if you jump in and you decide to buy this, you're going to be taken back to 1988, a Family Ties episode where what are they talking about? The censorship of a library, that a library needs to begin removing books because the language is too controversial. Or you're going to go back to 1995 when Will Smith and Fresh Prince, it's called Bullets Over Bel Air. I don't have to tell you what it's about.
Mm-hmm.
That is almost 30 years ago. And some of these things are just as important and very special today.
Absolutely.
Some are getting covered in TV and some of them aren't.
Yeah. Shavar Ross was another interviewee he was Dudley in Different Strokes. He was great. And his perspective on the molestation episode was, I was like, whoa. He was like talking about how as a kid, he was proud because he started to do exercising and he was happy to have his top off in the episode. I was like, okay, that's weird. Like, it's a different perspective. But then post doing the show, he would go to schools and teach kids about, inappropriate attention from adults. And I thought, wow, that is incredible because, this kind of discussion, it's like a Salil Moonfry when she would go to schools across America to promote anti-drug messaging because of Punky Brewster, which is amazing. It's amazing stuff like that kind of thing, propels these kind of, I guess, mini movements. But yeah, it's a really fascinating thing, that kind of marriage between TV and activism. I think it's really cool.
It is. So with all those other books and still this book fairly fresh, you're getting asked by podcasters to come and talk about it. Do you have any other projects on your desk or in your mind that you're thinking will be the next one you tackle?
So at the moment, which has been a long time in the process, I'm about to wrap, it's about to go to print soon, an oral history of Carrie, Brian De Palma's film. So that's pretty exciting. So that's, with a whole wide range of interviewees, Piper Laurie, Sissy Spacek, Nancy Allen, Amy Irving, everyone's in there. Other than that, I'm doing a lot of home media stuff, a lot of Blu-ray commentaries and producing and doing all the extras and doing interviews and stuff. So that's a big deal.
Which also preserves.
Yes.
So you are preserving the memories of the people who were part of creating something, whether it was released 10 years ago or 30 years ago. And that's really important.
Thank you. It really is. And it's all what I do is try and reach out to as many people who are with us to do content, to provide content for it, because I think it's really important as critics to give voices to these people, especially all these amazing women, especially all these amazing people of color, especially to all these amazing LGBT people, who've done all this incredible work that should not be neglected and not ever erased, because it's about preserving history and celebrating these legends, and they are iconic, amazing people. And it sort of irks me when people think that certain things that are happening these days are the first of its kind. That really irritates me, because it kind of starts to diminish and dismiss a lot of the work that came before these people. There were people who led the way, and they need to be really, really celebrated and championed. And just how wonderfully diverse everything was. People think it wasn't, but there was. It's there's a lot more of it now, thank God. But there were all these pioneers who, shaped culture.
And we can still see it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so one of my most treasured memories is talking to Carol Burnett. So I worked on the Annie 4K Blu-ray, which looks and sounds phenomenal. And I was so nervous. But she put me at ease in 1 second, and she basically talked to me like an equal. And I go, okay, I am not worthy. But she was just the most amazing, amazing interviewee. Like, it was just like two old friends talking. And that was just divine. So it's that kind of thing where these people who changed landscape, like she changed landscape of television. And, not only for women in TV, not only for women in comedy, not only for, people of impoverished backgrounds doing amazing works and becoming, these powerhouses, but also the actual structure of television. Even the variety shows that tapped in on serious subject matter or had those elements of somber moments or quiet, gentle, introspective moments. That's really important. That's all from Carol. That's all from Sonny and Cher show. That's all from all these amazing, The Muppet Show, all this stuff that was really important. I think that's what people don't get now. I think the tenderness is lost in contemporary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the anger sometimes is misdirected. I think a lot of it's sort of not warm, and that's what I miss. So there's a real comfort in going back and watching Good Times. There's a real comfort in watching Bewitched. There's a real comfort in watching, All in the Family and I Dream of Jeannie and Gilligan, all of it, because there's this warmth.
And the warmth, and then what I will say is kind of two things. One is the professionalism, the craft of acting, which when you watch an All in the Family episode or a Maude episode, it's almost like they're on a stage and you're sitting in the third row of the audience.
Yes.
It's that scripted, and it came out of that. Those were the writers. The writers for TV in many cases were writing plays and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And many of these performers got their start on stage. So it's just fascinating how you can see how TV has progressed, and those series, which were so well kept and so well shot and everything, that they are preserved. But the other thing, and this could be a podcast for another whole episode, is that Bob Mackie, during the Judy Garland TV series, 26 episodes, 1963 to 1964, Bob Mackie was like the assistant wardrobe design guy or costume design guy. And between 1964 and then when the Carol Burnett show premiered in the late 60s, he then got into the Carol Burnett and then ultimately made his name on Carol, which then transferred over to Cher, and then became the one who put Cher in all of those spectacle dresses for the Academy Awards. And that was culture. That was huge back in the day.
Yep. And like Cher, like, oh my God, like, can you be more versatile? There's a woman that can sing up a storm, like, my God, and then can play comedy beautifully, play drama beautifully. Just this versatility in this performer, like, just incredible. And, that's what I champion. I just think people sort of think of certain people as one thing, or they put them in a box. It's like, nah, look at their work. Look at how incredible they are. Look how powerful that is, and just diversity of bodies and diversities of body types. You've got, all these different body types and faces and cultures and ethnicities. It's just wonderful. And if you think of like how important TV was for people's visibility, that kind of transcends just artistry and goes into politics. If you think of someone like Esther Roll, my God, like, amazing woman who did so much that people need to look at and champion and laud, and like, but the spaces occupied between, like, if Maude, between Adrienne Barbeau, B. Arthur, and Esther Roll, like, that's insane. Like, just a still of the three of them, like, that is just, if that's not empowering, I don't know what is. It's just this beautiful, beautiful combo of these collected artists. And if you look at just Norman Lear's shows alone, from Sally Struthers to B. Arthur to Esther Roll to Isabel Sanford, these are just amazing actresses.
And then there was, his subtle hand in 227, and then there was One Day at a Time, both iterations. And One Day at a Time certainly tackled a fair share of sensitive social, these were three youngish women, middle-aged divorcee with two teenage/young adult daughters. So yeah, Norman Lear, and his memoir is out. He's written actually a couple of books. If you're interested in this, listeners, there is plenty. There is an entire book out about the making of All in the Family that just came out a couple of years ago, and I visited that. And the cool part about that is that it's a little bit like a scrapbook. And so they include physical, they have reprints of some of the fan letters they got, or the scripts and how the scripts were rewritten. So there is a lot to learn, and there's a lot to understand about the process if this is your thing. We are grateful that Lee Gambin has spent some time with us to dig into the deep weeds of these very special episodes and how important they are to TV and to women in TV, because it feels very representative of the change that women brought to TV out of the 50s and 60s. Lee, how do people buy your books?
I would recommend going direct to the publisher, because that's where I think we need to start supporting, indie groups. So bearmannermedia.com, and it's 2 volumes. And you mentioned at the start of the podcast about the end sort of year, and I feel like there's a reason why the VSC sort of stopped. The last show that was kind of trying to hang on to it and used it a lot was Blossom, which I think is a really beautiful show. Susan Harris's late husband, Paul Younger Wit, there was a showrunner on it, and it's a really, I love that show. And it's a teenage girl as the center of the focus, quirky, and she was, different, and it was very different, I guess. She was kind of like a bit of a descendant to like someone like from Sheila Cool from Dobie Gillis, kind of that kind of, slightly tomboyish, quirky kid. Anyway, so Blossom was doing the very special episode still, and then Seinfeld hits. Seinfeld makes a massive splash. Seinfeld is anti-message. Seinfeld is fervently, we don't want to do any lessons.
It's a show about nothing, right? Exactly.
And it's a show about 4 really selfish people. So we don't really want them to care. So I've always joked, there's so many people who love Seinfeld, and it's great. It's a great show, sure. But I've always joked, sorry, my Elaine is Elaine Nardo from Taxi, not Elaine Bennis from Seinfeld, because Elaine from Taxi is just a queen. Like Mary Lou Henner is just divine. And there's so much tenderness and warmth in Taxi. And then you look at Seinfeld, you're like, okay, there's no tenderness and warmth. They're quite mean.
Yeah, it hasn't aged quite as well as they would like it to, I guess.
Just to end the whole idea of this book is to sort of celebrate not only the social issues and that TV can say a lot and speak a lot about, race and gender and, addiction, etc., but also the heart and the warmth of these shows, these shows like MASH and All in the Family, and all these shows really have a lot of heart and sensitivity. And I think that's something that's missing post Seinfeld. And I might be speaking as someone who doesn't watch a lot of newer television, but I just find post Seinfeld wave of things just not as appealing to me as your Golden Girls, who are, my comfort food. There's something so magical about Mary Tyler Moore and Rhoda and the Munsters and all these amazing shows that have just sort of built, you and I and people like us, just a fabric of what we love, and formative and also continually formative. And thank God that, things have sort of gone into different directions. For instance, like, the reinvention of One Day at a Time with Rita Moreno. My God, like I watched that, and that was fantastic because it was like so true to the spirit of Norman Lear. And I'm looking for, I don't know much about it, but I hear there's a stunning thing coming up in the works with Norman Lear sort of running it with Laverne Cox, which sounds really exciting. But, all that stuff, Sanford and Son, all that stuff, it's just brilliant. And it's just, there's a warmth. And I think that's really important.
I think we're looking for a moment to sort of roll the clock back just a little bit to the time when our relationships were stronger and our optimism for where the country and the world was going was certainly stronger. And the positivity and the warmth, as you said, is something that I think we need every single day. So get it however you can. And for some of us, it's by putting in a DVD and stepping back in time. So I am grateful, Lee Gambin, for your time today. I'm glad that we had a chance to connect from Minneapolis to Melbourne. Is that right? You're in Melbourne?
Yeah. Oh, you're in the home of Mary.
I am about 3/4 of a mile from the Mary Tyler Moore house.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
How cool.
Yeah, she had an impact. All right. Well, I'm going to let you go.
Thank you so much. And I'm happy to do this show again with you whenever you need me.
I would welcome that. Lee Gambin knows his stuff. His insights into American TV and the knowledge of our history and culture is extraordinary. Thank you, Lee, for being my guest and for all you're doing to preserve TV herstory and history. Are you interested in more of my behind-the-scenes musings, research, and work? Sign up for our e-newsletter at tvherstory.com. Please know your information will never be sold or shared. My thanks as well to Mary Lou Morose for her attention to audio detail and clip stitchery. Our music is Take Me Higher by a musician named Jazzer and is found at freemusicarchive.org. Links for Lee's book, audio clips taken from YouTube, and links to past podcast episodes I've mentioned are in the show notes. Listeners, today we learned the role sitcoms played in providing the public service of educating, building awareness, or layering shades of perspective to remind us that life doesn't always have a laugh track. And that is why I podcast. I'm your host, Cynthia Bemis Abrams.